Thank you for coming, and I really do mean that. I said that to somebody in the early service. They said, well, I come every week. And I said, well, I'm still thankful that you come. You know, one of the things about some of the most basic truths in the Bible are really hard. I just want to tell you that. You know, like, this is a verse out of 1 John chapter, 1 John, it says, well, this is the song. You know it. It's like a kid's song, but it goes, this is my commandment, that you love one another, that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another, that your joy may be full. You're not very happy today, are you? Okay. Okay, let's try that a little bit. Let's come on, humor me, okay? This is my commandment, that you love one another, that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another, that your joy may be full. That your joy may be full. That your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another, that your joy may be full. So let's try it again now. This is my commandment, that you love one another, that your joy may be full. Come on. This is my commandment, that you love one another, that your joy may be full. That your joy may be full. That your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another, that your joy may be full. All right, very good. You know, it's such a profound verse. If you think about it, it says, I'm commanding you to love one another because I really want you to be happy. I'm commanding you to love one another because I really want you to be joyful, to be happy. And did you know that you got to kind of walk this back a little bit and think about it. Why is it that so many of you are not very happy? You're not, I mean, you're kind of happy. But if you think about the things that really drag on your joy, drag on your happiness, it's almost always a love issue, isn't it? It's like you're not getting along with your wife, or maybe people at work annoy you, or, you know, it's like, maybe it's not a big deal, but there's just these little areas of alienation. You following me? And they just kind of weigh on you, like you see them and you go, ugh. Just kind of takes a little chunk out of you. It's like I don't know if you guys remember like the old video games. I didn't play video games very much, but the ones I remember where you would lose health. Remember, your health would go down. And what happens is some of your relationships, because they're really not, there's a love issue in those relationships. Every time you're around people, your health just goes down. Except for in this case, it would be your joy level. So gradually, it just kind of grinds away at you. It's kind of like just a drag, like an anchor on your joy. And that's what happens in our lives. And that's why when the Apostle John writes that verse that we just sang, he's saying, I really want you to get good at loving one another, because in doing this, you're going to be the happiest version of yourself. You know what I'm talking about? Like some of you aren't very happy right now because you're kind of, whether you realize it or not, you're kind of annoyed with somebody. You're mad at somebody. I mean, you were talking about it all the way to church. I know that. No, I wasn't really listening. I don't have that kind of clearance. But what I'm trying to tell you is, Jesus comes into our life to help us live in this life. You know, Jesus comes to help us with the way we live, with the people that we live with, in the mess of life. And life is kind of messy, isn't it? Like at school or at work or the people that you're having to deal with in your job. You know, Jesus brings us truth for living in the mess of life, not in some like religious little religious bubble. And we live in a world full of angry people, don't we? It's everywhere. It's the radios blaring anger all the time. It's all around us. A lot of the stuff that we're bringing into our life is driven by anger. And that one of my favorite quotes is this. It's my own quote. That's why it's my favorite quote. It says, we live in a world full of angry people, and you can't help them if you're one of them. You live in a family of angry people. You can't help your family if you're an angry person, if you're one of them. If you live in a work situation where it's full of angry people, you're not going to be able to help them if you're one of them. But it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to not be angry. Jesus, last week we talked about how Jesus deals with the way anger drives our life in a number of ways. There's one way that's really obvious, and the other way is a little bit less easy to see, and it's a little more respectable for religious people. So there's the obvious kind of anger, right? That is like attack, assault. I'm going to verbally assault you. I'm going to get in your face. I'm going to get up in your grill, okay? There's emotional assault. There is physical assault where you actually physically put somebody in the smackdown, right? We understand that. Oh, that guy, that lady, they really get angry. But then there's the other side of anger, which is just as much anger, and it's just as violent in many ways, but it's more respectable. It's the passive side of anger, right? So we all get, really angry. But then there's the other side, which is the withdrawal side, right? The passive side, the cold shoulder, the silent treatment. You understand what I'm talking about? That's anger too. They're both anger. Now, the person who does what I would call the withdrawal approach to anger, here's what they do. I'm not angry. You're the one with the problem. It's just the total, the freeze out. You know what I'm talking about? And this can go on for days, right? It can go on for what? Months, right? It can go on for years. It can become a part of your normal day-to-day existence. And Jesus walks down into that messiness, that messy life. And the reason he does it, the reason, like we talked about last week, Jesus deals with this idea of you being angry with your brother or your sister and how to deal with it, whether it's assault or whether it's withdrawal. The reason is because it's common, right? It's where we live. It's the life that we live, whether we want to admit it or not. Jesus deals with all those issues that normally we would think, that's not really a good talk for like a nice religious crowd. Like Jesus deals with lust and adultery and divorce and dishonesty. You know why? Because it's common. This is the stuff that life is made up of. This is where we live. This is what's on your country western station. Our rap, right? I don't really know what they're singing about when they're singing about some stuff because I can't interpret it, but what I'm saying is this is where the arts, this is what the drama is that you're watching. And Jesus doesn't like talk nice little flowery talks. He wades right down into that stuff. He wades right down into the marriage mess. And marriage is a mess, isn't it? I mean, if we're honest, marriage is a mess. And you know why it's a mess? Because we are a mess. We're messed up. And when you bring your mess into a relationship with somebody else's mess, guess what you have? A bigger mess. Now you say, our relationship is just perfect. Well, I'm glad that it's good. And that's why I'm having this talk today, is maybe can help tune it up a little bit. But marriage can be great. As a matter of fact, there is no relationship that offers more hope to men and women. But there's also no relationship that can bring more harm to men and women. And we've all seen it, right? Let me, and this is not meant in any way to, this is not like, this is just take this for what it is. How many of you here have been directly or indirectly affected by divorce in some way? Maybe you went through it or somebody you know. Just raise your hands. Like somebody in your, come on, raise. I'm not going to ask, come down here and talk. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I want you to come down here and name names. No, that's not what I'm doing. What I'm saying is almost everybody in here has had somebody in your family. Maybe you went through that heartache. Maybe somebody in your family went through it. Maybe one of your kids or maybe a sibling. I know I've been through this, and both indirectly and directly in people in my life. It's just so hard. And this is where we live. This is this thing in our country, in our culture. It's the marriage mess. And yet, you know what? 99% of people, when they, almost all the meta studies, doesn't matter whether they're liberals or conservatives or religious or non-religious, amazing fact, they find 99% of people, when they ask them, want to be married to someone. They want to be happily married for life to somebody. And yet, they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to do it. Most people have no idea how to stay married, let alone be happily married. A lot of people, there are more people that can stay married for years and years, but being happily married, that's a different matter. There's a lot of people that stay married and are pretty unhappy. And I think that marriage takes a lot of work. It really does. It's not automatic. So, here's how it rolls. Now that you want to follow Jesus, you say, well, you know, that happened a long time ago. I didn't know about the Lord, or I've been going through that, and my family's been going through that. But now that I can make a little bit of an assumption that you're at least interested in following Jesus. Maybe you're not quite there yet, but you're interested. It's really important that you hear deeply what he says about this, so that you won't be blinded by your pride and think, well, we're doing so much better than other people. Or you won't be driven into guilt. You know, a lot of people go through a breakup or go through a divorce or go through loss in their family, and there's this whole shame thing and all this guilt thing that just plagues them for their whole life. That's not what this is about. What this talk today is really about is, and what Jesus is really teaching is how to face the truth about us all. How we can learn to love one another so that our joy might be full. And what Jesus does is he wants to lead us out of the marriage mess. Not you know, we're still ourselves. We're still going to have our ups and downs, but he's going to lead us out. And in order to be led out of the marriage mess, you've got to deal with a number of threats. And there's lots of threats to marriage. So I'm going to deal with 4. I don't have time to deal with the 40 that are out there. But I'm going to deal with 4 that Jesus deals with in this passage. Number 1, you have to counter the threat of unresolved anger with honesty and forgiveness. And we talked about anger last week, but let me review it a little bit. You know, Jesus said, you have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder. And whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. So Jesus says, that's what we've thought, like in the past. Hey, I'm not killing anybody. You know, hey, I'm not hurting anybody. But Jesus says, that's not good enough for you if you want to follow me. It's more than just whether you're out there killing people. He says, I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. And whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court. And whoever says, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into a fiery hell. Therefore, if you are presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar and go first, be reconciled to your brother, then come and present your offering. See, Jesus says you don't really have a right to your anger, at least past sundown. The Bible's clear. It says, don't let the sun go down in your anger, neither give the devil an opportunity. A lot of us think, I have the right to my anger. You do not know what she put me through, or he put me through, or they put me through. My mother and father-in-law, or my ex-wife, or my ex-husband. You do not know what they do, and they're still doing to my life. I have the right to be angry. Jesus says, if you're following me, you don't. And the reason he says that is because he wants you to be happy. He says, this is my commandment, that you love one another, that you learn how to love well so that you can have joy. You see, unresolved anger is taking a toll on your life right now without you even realizing it. Now, I'm not saying you haven't been hurt and you haven't been wrong and that you may not have been justified to be angry. You are just not justified to stay angry. Does that make sense? Are you following me? I understand it hurts and we get angry and we're wounded. And sometimes that anger even has an element of righteous indignation, but not if you hold on to it. Because unresolved anger leads to distance. Let me give you an example. In a marriage, you hurt each other. It happens. And over time, these little wounds create distance, right? Could be disappointment, could be like active anger that they did something to you that was really rotten, or it could have just been passive, that they just didn't. They just kind of left you. And you're angry about it. What that creates, the longer you're angry in your marriage, particularly, the more distance it creates, right? Even if you're in the same room, there's distance. And you know what distance leads to? Very clear in the context where Jesus is going with this. Distance leads to lustful justifications. Right? This is how it plays. Well, my marriage, this couple drifts, they say, we just drifted apart, and then so-and-so came into my life. Once again, back to your country western station. And we justify it. Well, we just don't love each other anymore. I just don't feel it. Of course you don't. You can't feel love for someone at the same time you're angry at them. And so they drift apart. And so Jesus is saying, one of the threats to marriage, and it's a real threat, is this area of lust. And so you have to not only counter the unresolved anger with honesty and forgiveness and be able to go to that person and say, this really hurt me, and you could talk about it, and you can honestly really do the work of apology. Many couples amaze me that they don't know how to do apology. They don't know how to say, look, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Now that I understand that you were hurt, please forgive me, etc. You see, and when you don't do apologies with honesty and forgiveness, what happens is distance sets up. And this can go on over years and years, where people are literally living in the same household like virtual strangers, roommates. And that's why Jesus says you have to watch for this, and then you have to counter that second threat, which is lust, with mental boundaries. Here's what happens in our society. People say, I'm not doing anything. I haven't been cheating on you. I'm not doing anything. And it's true, they're not. But I just want to say something. Now, let's talk about the obvious thing that you live with, that you guys have to deal with every day. Pornography is everywhere. We live in a pornographic society right now. Did you know that this is probably not going to shock any of you, but that porn sites get more visitors in a single day than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined? They're the leading internet traffic. As a matter of fact, they're the leading money makers on the internet. And that's the legal stuff. This is a real problem. You don't have to go looking for it anymore. It'll come to you. It'll come right through your smartphone or right through your computer monitor. This is a real threat. And the fact that you don't feel comfortable about it or you don't want to talk about it doesn't make it not a threat, because it affects the way you look at the person that you're married to. It affects, do you look at people as objects or do you look at them as people? And Jesus confronted this mentality. You have to remember, Jesus said, it's not just about, what you're doing, it's about your whole mentality. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. We all would agree on that. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery within his heart. If your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off and throw it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of your parts of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. It was said, whoever sends his wife away, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for the reason of unchastity, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And this is reciprocal. It would apply to both men and women. These two are connected. That's why they're in the context. Anger, lust, divorce, adultery, they're all part of the same matrix that Jesus is dealing with. And we understand why, because we see it too. You see, if you struggle in this area, Jesus confronted this mentality. And Jesus says, if you are going to counter the threat to your marriage, you have to set mental boundaries. You have to set some boundaries. Say, I'm not going there. You have to deal drastically with threats. He says, if your right hand offends you, cut it off. If your eye causes you to stumble, rip it out. I think he's making a point. I don't think he's suggesting you go rip your eyeball out. What he's saying to you is, in the strongest kind of metaphor, he's saying, think about how drastic that is. Rip your eyeball out. Cut your arm off, and not just cut it off, but throw it away. I've said this before. If I cut my arm off, I would wrap it in a damp rag and put it in a cooler. I would want to save it. But Jesus says, this is an area that is so significant, it's so powerful, it can get such a grip on you that you can't fool with it. Whether it's your smartphone. For some of you, you don't have any business having a smartphone. You need to just get rid of it. Maybe not have a phone. They asked kids, they said, if you had a choice between your parents or your smartphone, you don't want to know what they said. As a matter of fact, did you know that a lot of the resistance when we take kids on wilderness trips, one of the reasons why they don't want to go is they have no phone service. They go out of their tree or up the tree. If you have a problem in this area, you have to set boundaries. You may have to get one of those help I fell down and I can't get up phones. It could be internet. Maybe you don't need to have internet. How drastic are you willing to really deal with this if it's gotten a hold of your life? Because this is going to have an impact on your ability to be happily married. It really will. Because feeding lust in your life often moves from mental adultery into acts of adultery. And the reality is that almost everybody agrees that it isn't absolute. It doesn't say you must get a divorce if there's adultery, but it says there is granted the permission because of adultery, because adultery crushes that marital relationship so severely. Adultery destroys marriages every single day. every day. And that happens in church too. So you have to counter this issue in your head before it gets into your life. Second, and there's also a third threat Jesus deals with. You counter adultery by investing in your marriage daily. Do you know the reality is anger creates distance. Distance sets people up to deal with lust and this kind of wandering attention. And the wandering attention can lead them into actual adulterous relationships. And the way you counter it is by making sure you invest in your marriage on a daily basis. You know, a lot of people, they get married and they really pay attention to each other and they really are actively investing, and then they get disappointed or they get hurt or they get tired and they just neglect it. They just start to neglect their relationship. It's not always on purpose. It just happens over time. And pretty soon you quit saying those words that are really important. You quit doing those extra actions that are really important. You quit giving consideration and thinking about, I wonder how they're doing. I wonder if there's a problem there. Maybe they're going through a hard period and what am I thinking about? You quit praying together, for those of you that are Christian families. They say the very first thing that happens in marriage is the first casualty to marriage is you stop being nice. You just quit being nice to each other. It started out, hey, do you need anything? And to, where's the milk? You left it out again. It's very subtle. You begin to focus because you've got this resentment. And sometimes these resentments go back years and years. They're little word statements that are like locked up in a little trophy case. And they go back to, they said this. You can replay them, if you don't really let go of them thoroughly. And you start to focus on, instead of on their good qualities and the good things that they're doing, the things that they bring to the relationship, you begin to focus on your complaints and your disappointments and your hurts and all the offenses that have happened and the times that they weren't there and the times that they said they were going to do something and they didn't. And then you take each other for granted. You know what the Bible, Jesus is really saying? Don't take each other for granted even for one day. Don't do it. There's a cost. So you have to counter adultery by investing in your marriage daily. Now you say, oh man, you don't know how hard it is. I'm married to such a knucklehead. You might be. And I'm not saying it's not really hard for you, but you have to do your part. You are the one that chose to follow Jesus. You're in it right now, and so you have to do what you can. You can't make it happen, but you have to keep in it. You say, well, what if they don't? You have to keep in it. And then you have to counter broken promises with simple honesty. Do you know that when you got married, you made a bunch of promises? You may not have read the fine print, but that's just too bad. You did it. You made some promises. And you need to keep your promises. And it's very easy. What happens when people begin to not pay attention to the other person, when they begin to neglect them, they begin to not take seriously their promises. They become more like optional clauses. But Jesus said, again, you have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not make false vows, but shall fulfill your vows to the Lord. But I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven, for that it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you make an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything beyond these is evil. This is a controversial verse, and it's hard to understand sometimes. It's been, throughout the history of Christianity, a verse that has been, there's been a lot of passions around it. As a matter of fact, this idea of making pledges or making vows is Jesus is saying this is a very serious matter. As a matter of fact, if you know the history of this, did you know that in America that most what you call evangelical Christians, to be like Baptists and Methodists and maybe other groups that are what I call free church tradition, did you know that almost all of them up until the 20th century, they didn't forbade it, but almost all of them refused to take vows for anything. And that meant, did you know that most Americans during those time periods wouldn't say the Pledge of Allegiance? And it was not a lack of patriotism. They were a matter of just said, we don't believe the Bible says we can do that. There are some groups that still hold to that. They literally interpret it this way. And but they just felt like we can't do that. We can't pledge ultimate allegiance to anyone but God, the God of the Bible. But that's not, and I understand that. It's important that you understand that there's a context that came to America from both the Reformation and all the way through our time period that approached this verse in that way. But I don't really think that's its primary focus. What he's really saying is, be a person of your word. Have you ever had somebody tell you this? They'd say, I swear on a stack of Bibles. I mean it. Or one of my distant relatives used to say, when he was trying to convince you of something, I promise on my mama's, God bless her soul, her grave, she was a saint. You start crying. Every time he wanted to convince you that he was really serious, which in my kind of cynical self said, he's lying. Right? You know that's true. The more thou dost protest too much, right? And Jesus is really saying, be a person of your word. When you say you're going to do something, that's all you need to do. You don't need to embellish it. When you say you're not going to do something, keep your promise. This is especially true. This is true in your life as a Christian, but it's especially true in your marriage. Jesus said, but let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything beyond this, these is of evil. You see, and I'm not saying vows are wrong, but you need to be very, very serious about them if you're going to make one. For example, when you got married, did you know that you made vows? I mean, a lot of you, I did your service, but you forget. Those of you that are married, you have wedding vows. And so it goes kind of like this. Think about it. The groom. Do you, groom, take this woman to be your wife? Do you promise to love, to honor, to cherish and protect her, forsaking all others, and holding only to her forevermore? That's a very powerful, forsaking all others. That means I'm going to put her above everybody else. I'm going to put her above my extended family. I'm going to put her above the kids. She's the queen. Other than God, she's it. That's what it says. And you're supposed to say what? Yes, I do. Not, okay, whatever. It's supposed to be, yeah, whatever. I've never had anybody do that, but that wouldn't roll, okay? Said, really? Here, let me hold the bouquet while she hits you, okay? Okay? Then you turn to the bride and you say, bride, do you take groom to be your husband? Do you promise to love, honor, cherish, and protect him, forsaking all others, even your mother? Even the kids when they come along, he's got to be priority. Holding on, forsaking all and holding only to him forevermore? And you're supposed to say what? Yes, I do. Well, you know what? For you that are married, you said yes. You said I do. Now do what you said. You say, well, I didn't realize what I was getting into. Nobody realizes what they're getting into. But you keep your promises, because when you do not keep your promises, what happens is it feeds that That's all an expression of neglect, it feeds that tendency into resentment and alienation. When you say that you're going to do something, you need to do it. And when you say you're done doing something, you need to be done doing something. But here's the real rub. Here's the problem. We can't even keep the promises we make to ourselves, right? Think about it. You tell yourself, man, I call this the Friday night special. I'm never doing that again, right? And then you do. You say, you promise your wife, you promise yourself, you promise other people, oh, I'm never doing that again. I've learned my lesson. But then you do. You promise that you're going to do something. This is what we're going to do. And I understand that we're not perfect and sometimes, but if you don't keep your promise, you got to own it. You got to come back and say, look, I told you we were going to do this and I'm sorry. This is what happened. But that needs to not be every day. You see, if you are going to counter the threats to your relationship, counter the threats in your life, alienation and hostility, divorce, adultery, you've got to undo these broken promises. With simple honesty. Yes, no. I said I'd do it, I'm doing it. You say, well, that's going to mean I'm not going to agree to a lot. You know what? You shouldn't agree to things if you're not going to do it. Don't make empty promises. Because pretty soon you know what people think? Look, your actions speak louder than what? Words. You see, you and I can't finish what God started in our life. Those of you that have trusted Jesus, you've really turned to him, you can't finish. You don't have the power to keep your promises, no matter how great they might be, how many stacks of Bibles you put them on, no matter how many people you have there. You can't even keep those promises without God's help to yourself, let alone to other people. And that's why, for a lot of you, you don't realize this, but you can't do this without God's grace. You need him to do a work in your life, to change your heart, to bring forgiveness so that you can forgive yourself and other people, to bring his power of the resurrection in your life so that you have the strength to stand by your promises, even when it's hard, even when you don't feel like it. See, a promise doesn't matter. A promise, the reason we have promises is because there's a lot of times you don't feel like doing it, but you do it because you made a promise, not because you felt like it. God gives you the strength to do that. That's why you need him. And see, that's why some of you really, right here today, you need to settle this issue. You need to give your life to Christ. You need him. You're never going to be able to do this without him. You can't do what Jesus is talking about without his power. He came down into this mess. He said, do this and I'll help you. But some of you that have been believers for a long time, you're living exactly how I'm describing it. Not how he wants you to. You're living lives of alienation and neglect in your relationships. There's lust going on in your relationships. There may even be unfaithfulness. And you know what? You don't keep your promises. And what needs to happen is, the only way that's going to change is if you come to the place of where you are filled with the Holy Spirit in a fresh way. It's been a long time since you've encountered God in that way. That takes a fresh surrender. For some of you, you need a first surrender where you give your life to Jesus. Others of you, you need a fresh surrender where you really surrender to him and say, look, I can't do this. I need you to forgive me. I need you to help me. I can't do this without you, Lord. Are you so foolish thinking that you are going to achieve through your own self-effort what only can be done through the Spirit? That's what he asked. He said, do you think if it took the grace of God to save you that you can get by on your own the rest of the way? No, you need him right now. And so the great thing is the Lord starts right where you are. You don't have to go back and fix everything. You start fresh with him. He'll forgive you. He'll cleanse you. And then he'll begin to show you how to untangle this mess, the marriage mess. And at the end of it, it'll still be messy. But in the end of it, it'll be a reflection of God's grace in your life. I'd like you to bow your heads and close your eyes if you would. Lord, thank you that you do not talk in flowery abstractions. That you come right down into the rough and tumble, gritty, messy, muddy world that we live in. Broken relationships, distant relationships, anger, hostility, downright ugliness, betrayal, broken promises. And you speak to people that are promise breakers as one who never, ever, ever, ever breaks any of your promises. And you promise today that you will forgive. And you promise today that you will cleanse. And you promise today that you will give new, fresh power to anyone who will humble themselves and bend the knee and ask you for help. And so I pray for my friends that they would do that. That they be prepared to seek you. And we know that all who seek you are not disappointed. In Jesus' name, amen. I'd like you to take this little card, put your name on it, and maybe a way that we can contact you. You may have a prayer request. But there are some specific responses to this message that you'll find in a little box there. It's called Next Steps. And these would relate to how you would apply this message. Now, we will pray for you when we get this card. Every card we get, we pray specifically for you. We try and figure out a way that we might be able to help you, a way that we could help you. Some of you need family therapy. We have a staff person that does family therapy, Pastor Scott. We try and help you in that area. But there are some possible responses to this. I need Jesus to forgive me and change my heart. Look, there's no more important decision than that. Some of you, you need to give your life to Christ. You've fiddled around and kind of dabbled around in church, but the need in your life is you need to surrender to Christ. I want to forgive everyone, everything now. You know what the great thing about that? You can do that. You can forgive even the person you came with without ever saying a word. You might need to say something later, but this is an inside job. This is between you and God. You're either going to choose to forgive everything from everyone or you're not. You're either going to choose to be in fellowship with God or not. I promise to set mental boundaries and deal drastically with sin. I can't answer that for you, but I think you're already crystal clear on what you need to do. I commit to invest daily in my marriage. Maybe you haven't been doing that, but now you need to start with some concrete, basic, real steps. I commit to keep my promises. I do not know what promises you've been breaking or what promises you've been making, but you need to take them seriously.